there. So tonight's study again is this case study of Kristine Mann, the mandalas especially that Kristine Mann did. And this is going to be the kind of the main points for tonight. What I'd like to do is to begin with do a little biographical sketch of Kristine Mann and look at her role with what's called the founding mothers of Jungian psychology in the States. The founding mothers. There are 4 founding mothers who really brought Jungian psychology to America, to the States. And I want to look at her role just very briefly in that context. And then I'm going to try in the second point there to follow the red thread of Jung's analysis of Kristine Mann and interpretation of her paintings. I'm not going to follow Jung exactly all the way through. It would be impossible because he amplifies the material, you know, with such a depth and variety of amplifications that you'll have to read the essay yourself. The third thing I want to emphasize is that this will serve as a demonstration, really, of the steps in creating mandalas and of the psychological value of creating mandalas with one's own symbolic material. So I hope that comes across as we go through the material here tonight. Number 4 says a reflection on some typical dynamics in the individuation process for women. Now, this isn't going to fit every single woman's individuation process, but these are some typical dynamics that you can reflect on. And when we get together on Saturday for the roundtable, then that will be an opportunity to talk about, you know, all the variations on the theme. What does yours look like? And then finally, the 5th one there, stepping back a few steps from all of this, it really provides an opportunity for the consideration of the evolving God image and the relationship to unconscious femininity, which is a huge part of this, the evolving and the emerging God image. So this is going to be our frame for tonight. So let me jump right in. Here is Kristine Mann, a couple of pictures, one an earlier picture. I'm not sure how old she is, and this one, the young version, but she looks rather serious, and maybe this is when she was teaching at Vassar. I don't know, but she looks very serious here as a young woman. And then in her later years, she has that kind of a very warm smile and energy of, I don't know, there's something about a maturity there that seems to be present in the picture. She was born in 1873. So that puts her 2 years older than Jung. Jung was born in 1875. So she's just a couple of years older than Jung. And she died in 1945. So she lived to be 72. And she died a very difficult death. When she was diagnosed with cancer, I think well over a year before she died with breast cancer. And then she spent the last 5 months of her life in the hospital, and it was an agonizing experience for her. So her ending, you know, she was having to face a very challenging and difficult end of her individuation process. There's a letter from Jung that he writes to her once he hears of her diagnosis, which is very touching. And if we get to it that far in the PowerPoint, we'll have a chance to see that. I'm not sure we'll get that far tonight. Here are the founding mothers of Jungian psychology in America. So from left to right, we've got Beatrice Hinkle, who was born in 1874. So that would have made her a year younger than Kristine Mann. She died in 1953. She was quite the feminist activist. And I'll say a little more about her when we jump into the particular short bios. The second person there is Eleanor Bertine. She was born in 1887 and died in 1968. So Eleanor Bertine was 14 years younger than Kristine Mann. And then the 4th person in the frame is Mary Esther Harding. And Mary Esther Harding was born in 1888. She died in 1971. So she would have been, I think, 15 years younger than Kristine Mann. These four were literally instrumental in bringing Jung psychology to America. You'll hear the story as we go through. This is Kristine Mann's bio here, and pay attention to, or just notice the all that she did. I mean, the drive in her to learn and to grow and to seek truth. This was her kind of a driving um, theme in her life, was seeking truth. So she was the daughter of Charles Holbrook Mann, who died in 1918, and Klausine Borsenius, who died in 1923. The dates are going to be important later, but um, Charles Holbrook died earlier, 5 years earlier than Klausine did. Now Kristine completed a Bachelor of Arts from Smith College, attending from 1891 to 1895, and then she worked with her father on editing the New Church Messenger, which was a weekly newsletter for the Swedenborgian General Convention. This was a kind of a branch of a reformed branch, I guess, of Christianity that was initiated by Emanuel Swedenborg. And if you know anything about him, Swedenborg was initially a scientist in his first career, but then he began to have um, quite powerful dreams and visions, and began recording it and pondering it, and developed a whole a kind of a reform of the Christian church, and established what's called the New Church. And Charles Mann, the father of our subject here, Kristine Mann, was a minister in that congregation. So Kristine Mann helped her father out with the newsletter, and then she traveled to Berlin in 1898 and taught ancient history. That's kind of interesting, and English for a year at the Willard School for American Girls. And while she was there, she also studied German. So she became rather fluent in German and was able to then translate, or at least understand, the early writings of Jung when they were published initially in German. She returned to the US and completed a master's degree in English from the University of Michigan in 1901. And then she taught English at Vassar College from 1901 through 1905. Okay, and then, I mean, I'm just hitting the highlights. There's a lot that she did even between 1905 and 1907. But in 1907, in working with the women at Vassar, she was very interested in the health of women, young women, their entry into life, into society. And so she went to the kind of foundational study. She began the study of anatomy at Women's Medical School. And then 2 years later, at the age of 36, she entered Cornell Medical School, and she received her Doctor of Medicine in 1913 at the age of 40. So now by 40, she's got a BA, she's got a master's in English, and she's an MD. She then taught physical education and was part of a corps of women physicians who lectured and put on health demonstrations for women in educational institutions all over the country. This was a big mission for her, to educate women. She was actually joined in this by Eleanor Bertine, who was also by that time a physician. Now, Kristine Mann saw herself typologically as a sensation type, and Jung basically agreed with her that she was a sensation type. And you can see just in kind of her thread how that sensation function might be guiding her along in terms of what she did. When, for example, when she was teaching English at Vassar, she was teaching grammar, she was teaching logic, she was teaching debate and argumentation. So you know, there was both the sensation side and maybe the thinking side in her was very developed. So maybe we can keep that in mind as we go through her her experience in analysis. Now, here's where in 1919 she makes a significant shift to the psychological side. She meets Constance Long, a British psychoanalyst. Constance Long actually was the very first Jungian analyst in England. So she meets Constance Long at an international convention of women physicians in New York. And then she's deeply, deeply impressed or interested in the psychological aspects of women's health and became attracted to Jung's psychology. And shortly afterwards, she began analysis with Beatrice Hinkle, which we saw the picture of earlier. In 1921, she travels to Zurich and studies with Jung and returned then to begin a part-time analytical practice in New York City. She studied abroad with Jung several more times during the 20s. And in fact, she hosted a lecture by Jung in her apartment in 1925. This is when Jung came over, visited the US, and he made that trip down to Taos. You remember, and he visited Chief Mountain Lake, and he went to the Grand Canyon. And on that visit, Kristine Mann had him hosted a lecture by him at her apartment. So there was already a good connection. In 28, she traveled to Zurich for an intensive analysis with Jung. And then in 30, which is what we're looking at tonight, that intensive analysis in 28. In 1936, she founded the Analytical Psychology Club of New York with Beatrice Hinkle, Eleanor Bertine, and Esther Harding. And then she organized Jung's visit to Bailey Island in Maine, which is a very famous lecture that he did at Bailey Island. And this is where the Mann family had a summer home. So she really had a strong, strong connection to Jung from the very beginning. So she was part of this original foursome. I think it's interesting that there are four women that are part of this. Just to give you a brief a view of each one of these, or a look at their lives. Beatrice Hinkle was, as I said, she was one of the very first physicians in the US. She got her medical degree from Stanford, and then she went to New York to Cornell, started a clinic there, and that's where she met Kristine Mann when Kristine Mann was going to school there. But Beatrice Hinkle was such the advocate for women and women's psychology and she wanted to understand psychology, so she went to Vienna. She just took it upon herself. She went to Vienna and studied with Freud for a short time. She got disillusioned with Freud after a while, and then she shifted over to studying with Jung and found that, in her words, that Freud was too patriarchal and Jung's psychology was more matriarchal and more suited to women's psychology. So she appears in this very famous photograph at the Third International Psychoanalytic Conference in 1911. That was held in Weimar, Germany. And I mean, I love this photograph because you can see she's literally right in the middle of the frame. There she is, Beatrice Hinkle. Behind her, you would see Carl Jung, you'd see Sigmund Freud. Here is Emma Jung. I'm not sure who this analyst is, but here is Tony Wolff. And then moving this direction, this is Maria Moltzer, who was an artist as well as an analyst, and she shows up in the Red Book experience, if you're reading that carefully. This is Eugene Bleuler, who was Carl Jung's boss at the Bergholzli Clinic, psychiatric clinic. So here they are. This is and here's Beatrice Hinkle. He's right there, smack dab in the middle. It's quite amazing. The second person here is Eleanor Bertine. She was a student of Kristine Mann when Kristine Mann was teaching at Vassar. She then went on to Cornell Medical School with Mann, also completing her medical degree in 1913. So they both became physicians. In 1920, she went to London for an analysis with Constance Long. and then to Zurich for analysis with Jung. And on returning to New York City a couple of years later, she and Dr. Mann established their own pioneering psychoanalytic practices. With Dr. Mann and Mary Esther Harding, she co-founded the Analytical Psychology Club. And then each year, this is so interesting, the three of them, the three women traveled to Zurich for 2 months of analysis. Can you imagine? and then spent summers studying and working at Bailey Island, Maine, where Dr. Mann's had the family home there. So they would spend their summers there at Bailey Island seeing their clients who would, I guess, go out to Bailey Island for their analysis. And Dr. Bertine published a couple of books, one called Human Relationships, which you can buy through Inner City Books, and Jung's Contribution to Our Time, a collection of essays. And then finally, just to round it out, here is maybe the pillar of the four, Mary Esther Harding. She was a physician, was trained at the London School of Medicine for Women. She began studying depth psychology with Jung in Zurich in 1922, a training that she continued on annual visits for many subsequent years. She came to New York to start her analytical practice in 1923. She had met Kristine Mann and Eleanor Bertine in Zurich. So she joins them. And then she was also one of the founding members of that Analytical Psychology Club of New York. These are some of the books that Esther Harding is known for. The first two, The Way of All Women and Women's Mysteries, were pioneering works in the field of feminine psychology. So in those volumes, she looked at the archetypal and mythological background to women's psychology or feminine psychology. They're quite classics in the field. And then her later work, Psychic Energy, Its Source and Its Transformation, quickly became a foundational resource for Jungian psychology. I highly, highly recommend Psychic Energy. I don't quite understand why it hasn't had more of a central role in the kind of the Jungian literature, because it is, first of all, it's written by a woman who's studying directly with Jung, and then she's writing out of her own experience with her own practice in New York. She wrote this during World War II, where she was kind of sequestered in the States. She couldn't travel to Zurich back and forth. And this is an interesting detail that Edward Edinger began his analysis with her in 1951. So Harding was the analyst for Edward Edinger, and probably most of you know Edward Edinger became the premier American analyst, Jungian analyst, up until his death in 1998. So you can see the thread from Jung to the four mothers, founding mothers, to Edward Edinger. You can just see that thread, how important this beginning was. So I'm just so impressed with what they have done, the four of them. So we'll consider this kind of a homage to them, and let's shift now to Kristine Mann, the mandalas of Kristine Mann. I'm going to begin with what Jung says first about the case. This is kind of, he's writing a little synopsis of the case here, and he's doing this anonymously. He's referring to her as Miss X because he wants to protect the anonymity. But he writes this, and you can find this again in the volume, the Collected Works, volume 9-1. And I really do encourage you to buy the book. It's the chapter is called A Study in the Process of Individuation. So this is how Jung describes, this is part of his description of her. So he writes that in 1928, at the age of 55, now that's interesting too, isn't it? So at 55, she's doing her serious analysis. So lest one think, oh, it's too late to start things in your 50s. No, At 55, she came to Europe in order to continue her studies under my guidance. As the daughter of an exceptional father, she had varied interest, was extremely cultured, and possessed a lively turn of mind. She was unmarried, but lived with the unconscious equivalent of a human partner, namely the animus, the personification of everything masculine in a woman, in that characteristic liaison so often met with in women with an academic education. So as frequently happens, this development of hers was based on a positive father complex. She was a father's daughter, if you will, and consequently did not have a good relation to her mother. I mean, consequently, that it's not necessarily the case that one would not have a good relationship to the mother with a positive father complex, but this apparently was her situation. So she had a very strong animus, and I'm saying that in a positive sense. You saw all the things that she accomplished in her life. There was a drive in her that took her to the next challenge and the next challenge, and she had that quality in her personality. However, she had reached a limit and had got stuck. And this made it urgently necessary for her to look around for ways that might lead her out of her impasse. And that was one of the reasons for her trip to Europe. Her mother had died in 1923, and now she is coming to Europe in 1928. So this is 5 years later. So in deciding to go to Europe, she was conscious that she was turning back to her own origins and was setting out to reactivate a portion of her childhood that was bound up with her mother. So, okay, that's a good rule of thumb. If you're getting stuck, you might do well to go back to the beginning and to see what you might find in your unlived life. So before coming to Zurich, she had gone to Denmark, her mother's country. And there, the thing that affected her most was the landscape. Unexpectedly, there came over her the desire to paint, above all, landscape motifs. I don't know if any of you are painters and if you do landscapes, but this is what captivated her. Until then, she had noticed no such aesthetic inclinations in herself. Also, she lacked the ability to paint or draw. Now, that's not exactly true. She maybe lacked the training, but she had a great capacity to paint or draw, as we're going to see. She tried her hand at watercolors, and her modest landscapes filled her with a strange feeling of contentment. It's a little bit like how Georgia O'Keeffe began with her watercolors, if you know Georgia O'Keeffe's story. So she begins landscapes and watercolors. Now, Jung continues this introduction. Arriving in Zurich, she continued her painting efforts, and on the day before she came to me for the first time, she began another landscape. So now she's in Zurich. So this time she's doing it from memory. While she was working on it, a fantasy image suddenly thrust itself between her and the picture. She saw herself with the lower half of her body in the earth, stuck fast in a block of rock. The region round was a beach strewn with boulders. In the background was the sea. She felt caught and helpless. And then continuing this fantasy, then she suddenly saw me, Jung, in the guise of a medieval sorcerer. She shouted for help. I came along and touched the rock with a magic wand. The stone instantly burst open and she stepped out uninjured. And she then painted this fantasy image instead of the landscape and brought it to me on the following day. So I've just kind of given it this brief description of stuck. And we'll take a look at this painting a bit. This is if your analyst shows up the very first day and brings this kind of painting, then you can ponder over just what's going to be involved in this analysis. So you can see as we kind of take a look at what's here. let's kind of see if we can sort it out a little bit. You can see her, she's stuck in the rock. Perhaps she's an extension of one of these peaks over here, but you can definitely see that she's stuck. Her lower half of the body is stuck in the rock. And Jung even comments that perhaps that lower half of her is really what is unconscious to her that she needs to become more conscious of. She's facing to the left this way here, so typically in picture interpretation, we would interpret that as the unconscious side, and by the darkness, the shadow on her face, then we would assume that yes, it would be the unconscious side that she's facing. You can see that the wind is blowing because her hair is blown. So the wind is blowing, and we associate the wind in a woman's psyche very often with the animus. And so we have a presence of this wind. We have her stuck. And then we have a curious painting of these boulders. And Jung points out that the boulders, while they're reflecting light, apparently, they give the appearance of what looks like an egg almost, or what looks like if you cut a hard-boiled egg in half and you'd see the yolk. So he said these eggs look strikingly, these boulders look strikingly like eggs. And so he as he pondered the image with her, of course he would know it's not unusual for people to want to come into analysis when they get stuck. And there are any number of reasons why one can get stuck in the trajectory of one's life. You can ponder that yourself. What are the ways that you have gotten stuck where the flow of life suddenly, or maybe slowly, kind of grinds to a halt and you're stuck? And I mean, that can happen. That can happen in so many different ways. But because she's painting landscapes from her mother's country, Jung hypothesized that perhaps her stuckness had to do with the fact that she is unconsciously stuck or identified with her feminine nature, that it's not conscious to her fully. I mean, not that she's completely unconscious of her femininity or feminine nature, but there was a great deal of her feminine life that was not conscious to her as she was living a life, perhaps greatly guided, largely guided by, kind of her father's influence and the father animus, that kind of animus that really encouraged her, maybe drove her and pushed her to all the accomplishments that she was doing. When Jung saw the eggs in the painting, then he made the conclusion that the cure for her if you will, the cure for her stuckness was going to be the individuation process. That the eggs represented the germ of the self, or the germ of wholeness that needed to be hatched or lived out. So this is the starting point. Now, after the initial session, Kristine Mann went back to her original fantasy, and that the ending of the fantasy was that, as we saw earlier, the region roundabout was a beach strewn with boulders. In the background was the sea. She felt caught and helpless. That part she knew. And then suddenly she saw me, Jung, in the guise of a medieval sorcerer. She shouted for help, and I came along and touched the rock with a magic wand. The stone instantly burst open, and she stepped out uninjured. Well, she tried to sketch this out. She wanted to paint it, but she was having trouble drawing human figures, which of course we would all have trouble with when we're first trying to draw. And so Jung encouraged her. She said, well, try finding an image, or rather a symbol or a hieroglyph for the person. That might help you as you try to do the painting. And so she followed his suggestion. And so as she painted her picture, there was no Jung in the picture, but what she painted was a picture that I've called struck by the divine. And this is what she painted. Now, in this painting, you don't see Jung, you don't see her figure, but you see that she has painted herself as a sphere that is being struck by lightning, or rather, she is being the lightning is dislodging her from her her being stuck in the rock. It's just a fascinating, fascinating description here. And the magic wand of Jung as the sorcerer, that it's something like Jung is a sorcerer, kind of like Merlin or something. His wand, it carries this magic power, and I don't know, maybe that was Kristine Mann's fantasy that Jung could kind of touch her with the magic wand, wave a magic wand, and she could be freed of her problem or her stuckness. But how she depicted it was as a lightning bolt. And the lightning bolt that breaks her out of her stuckness. And Jung points out that it also enlivens, animates her center, the core of who she is. So he makes the point that Kristine has naturally drawn herself or the personality as a circle or a sphere, which corresponds to an age-old way of looking at one's wholeness as the sphere. And Jung wondered about the other two spheres and postulated or hypothesized that perhaps these referred to Eleanor Bertin and Mary Esther Harding, with whom Kristine Mann was so closely identified with, and that this lightning bolt was kind of breaking her out of a stuckness, maybe in identifying with them, and something identifying with the landscape, the feminine landscape, and breaking it and bringing it. I mean, what can we say about a lightning bolt? I mean, it's an expression being struck by the divine, I called it. But this is anything that breaks us out and changes our psychic state in a dramatic way. And of course, a lightning bolt can hit us in lots of different ways psychologically. I mean, it can be a dramatic turn of events in our lives. It can be, a powerful dream. It can be going to Zurich and starting analysis with Jung. It can constellate this huge energy of the self that breaks us out of a stuckness and really emphasizes our individuality. So here she's a unique person now, unique individuality being broken out of this. So you can think of those dramatic moments where you got unstuck or broken out of a collective group or identification. I mean, we could talk more and more about this, but I want to continue along. We've got lots to say. Maybe I can pause and catch my breath. Does anybody have a comment or an observation about this lightning bolt or this picture, just to get I can breathe, and you might say a comment or two. What strikes you? What strikes you? What do you see in the painting that interests you? Does anybody see any details?
Had something from me. I don't know if I have much of an analysis from it, but Alan, do you remember that one time where we got coffee and I told you about that dream that I had where I was standing by the garage and that lightning bolt came in and it was like it was in the garage and there was like all these dogs in there and it was like very primitive and there was something about it. It was very shocking and then it kind of almost made me in the dream almost made me sort of like collapse, like I was having a heart attack or something. And then afterwards, I felt like invigorated and I was being separated out from all my friends who were kind of walking the other way. So there's trying to sort of like dig into sort of the archetypal nature of it just from that instance is it's a little murky, but kind of the sentiment I'm going for is I got the sense or I got the feeling as long as as well as I do with this painting as well, that there is that sense of sort of differentiation that comes with it, being lodged in, being enmeshed in with some kind of surrounding or some kind of stratum within the psyche. In my case, it was like the garage with all those dogs. Like I was one of the dogs. I was I was like one of the animals with them. And I was either kind of like incorporating that energy or I was being differentiated from it while also being differentiated from my friends who are kind of walking the other way too. And I sort of see a similar motif here too, that
Sure.
the stone is sort of it still seems like it's still stone. and it's differentiating from the rest of the stone, and you can see these marks of differentiation in the rest of the rock formation. You see all these circles and all of these triangles or these pyramidal sort of sculptures, these shapes that are kind of like, it's sort of like unformed potentia. That's and there's a depth to it too. And of course, that reminds me of King Arthur as well, where King Arthur has to pull this sword from the stone, and the stone is seen as this kind of archetypal image of the Great Mother at the depths. This sort of, because he gets the sword from the lake, from the Lady of the Lake, but in other versions of the myth, he also gets it from the stone. These are two different sort of images of the divine goddess.
Okay. Yes. And I'm gonna ask you to pause there, because I already got, my mind is reeling with possibilities from what you're saying, Omid. The archetypal side of this, absolutely. So we can think of any experience, a dramatic experience that separates us from the collective, shows us our individuality, maybe even launches us into a loneliness, a lonely period. And then we have to then process it. So she tries to process. Thank you, Omid, for the dream, because that was right on the mark. I mean, we can think of other examples like St. Paul and the lightning flash, or the flash of light that knocks him off his horse or knocks him to the ground, right? And that begins a whole new process. Or that the lightning of I don't know. There's so many ways that the lightning bolt can express that. So when she has this lightning bolt experience, suddenly she remembers two other big dreams from her life. And I want to share those.
Lee's got her hand up.
Oh, okay. Okay. I can't see from with my, but Lee, jump in.
I just was struck in the picture by what appears to be three mountains. And in the collective unconscious, the ascent to the sacred mountain is a critical journey. And it looks like the circle of the self is right at the pinnacle of one of those three mountains. And for me, they work as a symbol of the sacred mountains because they're tipped with gold. And that's simply a great place to get struck by lightning.
Yes. Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Lee. And thank you, Kristine, for pointing out. I can't see people when I've got the slide in front of me here. So if you can catch those, Kristine, I appreciate it. That's great. All right. Well, this experience, this initial experience with Jung and getting started in analysis brings to mind two really big important big dreams from her past. And let's take a look at these. So the first of these is, this took place when she was under anesthesia during a major surgery. And in this vision, or the dream vision, like Jung calls it, she saw a gray globe of the world, and a silver band rotated around the equator. And according to the frequency of its vibrations, so this band is vibrating, right? It formed alternating zones of condensation, which kind of got narrowed down. And they were in this vision numbered 1 to 3. And then evaporation, where it widened out, and it was numbered up to 12. This was her vision. Now later, she would describe this image as a planet in the making. And so you can think about one's own personality, the wholeness of one's personality in the making as a planet. And then she said the bands as the wings of Mercury, she called it quicksilver. And she also later described it as the animus, this band around the globe, as the animus, who is like a veil that hides the true personality. That was her first dream. And then the second one was a year earlier than this one, which is really, really a big one for her. In the dream, she saw a golden snake in the sky. It demanded the sacrifice from among a great crowd of people of a young man, who obeyed this demand with an expression of sorrow. And then the dream repeated a little later, but this time the snake picked on the dreamer herself. The assembled people regarded her compassionately, but she took her fate proudly on herself. her fate of being picked by the snake. I mean, we can think of any number of dreams where we're maybe bitten by a snake or chased by a snake, or this snake is such an important figure. So this is a golden snake that she sees. So she decides to paint this. This is what her painting looks like. So you can see the planet in the making, as she described it, and it has these silvery bands around it with the number 12 in that wider section of the band, right? And it's got a blue interior and a red or wine red exterior to this. You can see above the painting of the golden snake. Very interesting that that the snake is pointed down towards the planet or this globe. It's got this wonderful double loop, like something out of a Celtic design. So we can see the energy of the snake and the two-ness of the snake, even in the curves and the loops. But remembering this is a golden snake, and she's associating all of this with, she associates it later with Hermes, or with the messenger god from the heavens. So here we have what she described as kind of some of the animus energy that can veil the true personality. But then there's the golden snake, which you can also consider how the golden snake is not so different than this lightning bolt, or at least might have a relationship to the lightning bolt. So you can see how these dreams, when you remember them, then different connections happen in the psyche this way. So here she has a golden snake above. With all the yellow coming in here, we can assume that there's consciousness kind of coming to this prior set of dreams that she had. And again, we could work further, but not to be missed is that she is quite an artist to be able to do the work as carefully as she is doing it. But this is her painting of two big dreams. Now, after she did the painting, the process doesn't stop there. She felt that the silvery substance now that's here, that ought to be inside, with the black lines of force remaining outside to form a black snake. And this would now encircle the sphere. And she felt the snake as a terrible danger, as something threatening the integrity of the sphere. So she's seeing this in her mind's eye, how it's going to shift. And then one thing continued to give her difficulty. So in her mind's eye, she had to put the snake, she said, 100% at the top, in the middle, in order to satisfy the eyes. And so later, Jung showed her a picture from his collection, really from the Red Book, done by a man, which is really himself, of a floating sphere being penetrated from below by a black phallus-like object. Now, Jung's comment on this is that for a woman, the typical danger, and not the only, but the typical danger emanating from the unconscious comes from above, from the spiritual sphere personified by the animus, whereas for the man, it comes from the chthonic realm of the world and woman, that is the anima projected onto the world. So he's going to see a typical pattern here. It doesn't cover everyone's individuation, but she's going to paint this new picture, which I called being penetrated by the mercurial spirit of the unconscious. Here it is, an incredible painting. The background is a grayish color. The mandala has got this orangish or flesh color. And you see the snake, the black snake. It still has its two little curls or curves, right? The two-ness. But now the black snake, the golden snake, is black, but it has golden wings. And so here's where she associated this to Hermes, the winged Hermes. So she associated this to the spirit of Hermes. Jung would consider this also a kind of the mercurial spirit. One would say the spirit of the unconscious. And the spirit of the unconscious is penetrating the inner circle, which looks very organic, like this is a kind of a stylized painting of the uterus, or the uterus and the ovaries, right? It's the interior um, of kind of a woman's creative center. Of course, it's stylized. This isn't exactly the uterus and ovaries, and Kristine Mann was a doctor. She would well know that, but it's kind of a stylized uterus and ovaries, but it's also kind of plant-like. And Jung was impressed that with the whiteness of these two aspects here, that he described this as the moon aspect, or the moon vessel in the psyche, the feminine psyche, receiving from this mercurial spirit the golden seed, or the golden essence that's going to start the whole process in motion. Now, we could see this painting as describing Kristine Mann's experience at this point, where the unconscious, the spirit of the unconscious, is penetrating to her deep, deep core. This is where she is having an experience of the unconscious, where she knows her depths are really, really being penetrated. So this is how she is portraying it. But you could also think about this painting as a description of, collectively, of the feminine psyche in general being penetrated by this mercurial spirit, and this whole creative process being set in motion for in the psyches of women. Because I mean, this was back in the 20s, and this was, wasn't the very beginning of the women's movement, but this does express something that goes well beyond Kristine Mann's personal experience. But perhaps, we can say that this is the spirit of the unconscious. The spirit of nature is deeply, deeply penetrating into her. And all this is constellated, of course, by her being there, in Zurich, starting this analysis. And this is her experience. The snake is black, so it has that earthy kind of phonic aspect to it, but it also has the golden wings of Hermes. So this is quite a impressive start. Now at this point, he's going to start painting her mandalas in a more abstract way. And when you look at the paintings initially, it can be a little bit hard to follow, like, what is she doing, and how did she get to that place of doing these abstract type of designs? And so what I wanted to show you was how an example of that, and how Jung himself came to drawing and painting mandalas that began to incorporate something more abstract. So I want to take you back to Jung's first drawings of mandalas back to 1917. If you have the Red Book, this is in the very back of the Red Book, the Liber Novus. There's a series of sketches that he did, where he decided that each morning he was going to get up in the morning and to draw a mandala that represented kind of what his psychic state was. I mean, one think, well, how does one do that? That sounds impossible. I'm not going to draw my psychic state. But if we look at what he did here, it's less complicated than you might imagine, because I mean, you can kind of deconstruct this picture. You can tell that he would start obviously by drawing a circle. So you can see him drawing the circle around, and anytime we draw a circle, it's not going to be perfectly round, but already you can kind of see that there's going to be an influence from the unconscious as we're just doing things freehand. So he's got a circle, and he's pondering. I'm just kind of fantasizing about this, but he's pondering what is my inner state right now? Is it expansive? Is it contractive? Is it contracted? What's my energy feel like? And he started off by drawing a symmetrical flower shape. So you can imagine, he says, well, it feels kind of balanced or symmetrical. So he draws, and maybe it just comes to him spontaneously. He just wants to draw a flower. So he's drawing this out. You can see how this, it would just naturally happen. And once he's drawn the flower, it would just kind of be a natural thing to just start filling in. these little lines that connect and this is a natural way of kind of staying in the meditation, just doing a repetitive motion again and again and again and again. You're kind of staying in that meditative moment. I mean, he does it all the way around, and at some point he starts drawing in the little dots and he adds them to this outer ring. And then at some point, it feels like it wants to go beyond the circle. And so he starts, and I think he started here by looking at it carefully. He starts making these elongations, and he's going around and he's going around and he's going around and he's going around, and he gets here and he stops. Because if he just comes down, what do I do with this big space? It doesn't easily, do I do 2 loops or do I do 1 big loop? And so then it seems like he decides just to do 1 big loop to fill up that space. Again, this is my fantasy, but it fits the method of doing this. And so just unconsciously, his drawing now is lopsided. There's a bigger shape here. Something is not quite in sync here. And I hope you forgive my speculation and fantasy how he did this, but you can do this yourself. In the morning, you can draw a circle, whatever, by freehand, and then kind of put in the circle an image that expresses something about your own psychic feeling in that moment. Anybody can do that. It might be, a flower like this that's symmetrical, or I don't know, it could be something from your dream, or it could be just something that just naturally occurs to you. And then just start working with it. He started with the little circles, and then dots came into it, and then more circles, and then he had this. Well, the next one he did was going to look like this, which kind of incorporated a little bit of that shift, right? So he's opening it up, and it goes on from there. There's a whole series of these that he does. But one thing about doing the mandalas this way is that you can take a mandala from one day and you can kind of alter it the next day and the next day. You don't have to start from scratch. And so this is a way to kind of follow the thread of your psychic energy. So it's quite interesting how he starts doing this. All right, just a word about the mandala so we know what we're talking about. Now, the word mandala means circle. It's also pronounced mandala if you prefer. Both pronunciations are perfectly fine. Jung used mandala, so I'm just kind of following him. I'm stuck there. Mandala means circle. Their basic motif is the premonition of a center of personality. You notice it's a premonition of a center of personality, not the final product. So when you draw a mandala, you don't have yourself now in hand. You have a premonition of what the center is, a hint of what the center is. It's a kind of central point within the psyche to which everything is related, by which everything is arranged, and which is itself a source of energy. So already he's defining what he considers to be the self. Now, the energy of the central point is manifested in the almost irresistible compulsion and urge to become what one is, that individuation drive. Just as every organism is driven to assume the form that is characteristic of its nature, no matter what the circumstances. This center is not felt or thought of as the ego. It's not the ego, but if one may so express it, as the self. Now, this is taken from his essay on mandala symbolism, which is also, as you notice, in volume 9.1. You can read about mandalas in that volume. So this is his mandala. This is how he then redraws it very carefully and then ends up painting it. So we can well imagine that Kristine Mann would need to do something like this and then redraw it in this way. Do what comes spontaneously first, and then do the formal painting of it. I mean, these are incredible mandala paintings in the Red Book by Jung. So Kristine Mann has this image, and she's going to go to a more abstract image, this penetration. So the energy that she's going to focus on is the activation of the center. That's what she's focusing on, and constellating the innate pattern of fourness somehow in her mind's eye, this is what she's going to see when she is experiencing this deep, deep, deep penetration of this spirit of the unconscious. It's her center is getting activated, and there's a pattern of fourness that she sees in her mind's eye. And I've just titled this The Fertilization by the Spirit of Hermes. And this is what it looks like when she painted it. Amazing, huh? So now we're getting more abstract, but you can see how she got here. You got the serpent on the side. The center is activated. She had some sense of fourness. She draws. I mean, how did she do this? She must have drawn, original circle like Jung did, and she probably did an inner circle here to mark the center, and then the 4 circles around it would be the natural progression of drawing something like this. And either then she began the curlicues, kind of this movement of within the spheres that goes in a counterclockwise direction. Jung would call that the leftward movement. She does 4 of these. And at some point she draws these surrounding connecting lines, right? And she decides to color them in black as the snake, but also gold. The swirling lines she colors in blue and light blue, purple, and some green in here, and they're all identical. She had the idea that this was a description of the 4 functions when she later looked at the painting. And Jung thought, well, they're all identical, so it probably isn't the 4 functions, but it may be that fourness in the psyche, or that almost template in the psyche for the functions, the pattern in the self for the functions to develop. So it's also the pattern of wholeness. This also, the inward movement, or this leftward movement, denotes a moving inward. So this would denote for her a movement towards her depths, an introverted movement for her, going inward toward this green center, which we would interpret probably as just a life center. But she's got all this energy and redness around on the outside. So if we're remembering that Kristine Mann is father's daughter, and she's very spiritual, and when this snake of Hermes permeates her with this golden seed, it's going to activate what Jung calls her spiritual life. Her inner spirituality is getting activated here, but it's taking her deep, and she's going more and more deeply into her depths in the process. Now, after painting this, then she has a dream. It's good that Jung gives us the intermediate dreams that she has in the process. So Miss X dreamt at this point that she returned to the city after a holiday in the country. To her astonishment, she found a tree growing in the middle of the room where she worked. And she thought, well, with its thick bark, this tree can withstand the heat of an apartment. Now, Jung comments on the dream and says that the tree now is going to explain the plant motif that's going to appear in the next mandala. And he would say this we know as an individuation symbol. And in the next mandala we're going to take a look at, there's going to be a red kind of phallic aspect pushing inward in the painting. And he describes this as the entry of affect or emotion into her spiritual interior, bringing a strong feeling into her spiritual life. So, I mean, one can well imagine, and here, well, let me show you the painting. I titled it The Philosophical Tree, because Jung points out that it is archetypally, it functions like the philosophical tree in her. And the idea there is energizing the spiritual life that is within her in the psyche. And this is how she paints it. All right. So if we didn't have that background, we would look at this and wonder, what do we have here? But as Jung said, the greenness here, it's not exactly a plant, is it? It's the color of vegetation. It's the green, but it's still very stylized. It has that leftward kind of movement, you know, this, as Jung had pointed out. He even says in this this image that it reminded him of the swastika. But this was in 1928, so this is well before the swastika had been, you know, just been abdicated, or whatever the word is, by the, you know, the Nazi Party for their emblem. This is a movement of fourness in the direction of the unconscious, into the depths. You can see it has a center to it. And, and then he points out, then he's got the redness that's pushing in. And this is that emotion and that affect that's pushing into her spiritual center. What we can well imagine that this is kind of from the body, that this is the body reaction to this intensification of this inner spiritual life. It's becoming emotional for her. And the philosophical tree is still spiritual, and that's kind of what he's pointing out. It's a combination of the inner spiritual life and this emotionality that's coming into it. Who knows what my my own reaction? I think that emotionality is coming right in as I'm working on this. Continuing on from this painting, I hope that's okay. We'll have to take a pause here in a moment to get my breath too. So 2 days before painting the next picture, Miss X dreamt that she was in her father's room in their country house. But my mother had moved my bed away from the wall into the middle of the room and had slept in it. I was furious and moved the bed back to its former place. In the dream, the bed cover was red, exactly the red reproduced in the picture. Okay, so she's in her father's room, right? And she's in that father energy. And the mother moves Kristine's bed into the center of the room, and mother sleeps right there. You can get the picture of the sleeping mother right there in the middle of the room. Of course, this makes Kristine furious, and so she moves it all back. So I've entitled this one "Ablaze," identified with the father's spirit, and in the spell of the transference. So the father's spirit, she's in that father energy, and at this time she's having a strong reaction or a strong engagement with Jung, with the analysis, with the painting. I mean, she's incredibly in this father energy, and so this is what she paints. It's very, very interesting, very, very interesting. It's a colorful painting. Now notice that this sphere, or the mandala, is sitting in the blackness, surrounded by blackness. I mean, the earlier ones, you know, there's grayness there, and the one before that is golden. But what's pressing in around her more and more now is blackness. That's very interesting, isn't it? So the blackness is surrounding her. She paints this design so that she has the inner blackness here, but it's got a golden center, and you can see the same kind of curly swastika aspects here again. And the energy is now a movement from the center outward, because if you look carefully, let me just go carefully here. If you look, not so carefully now, but when you look at these wings, how she's drawn the wings, that the wings are pointed in a way that shows the energy moving out. You see that with the wings, and the energy is moving out from this center. And we just talked about her connection to the Father and to that spirit, animus spirit. So the energy is moving outward. And the center is a squarish center of blue and kind of light green, right? And you can see that she has these emanations of rainbow colors, moving outward. She's got all these golden bands here. So this push outward, one can well imagine now that if she was protesting the mother energy in the dream, there's something about a pushing outward from the center in the presence of all the surrounding blackness. Again, that's just my hypothesis here, but you can see how this energy is moving outward, and even the rainbows, that might be an expression of certainly the rainbows express a vitality, and the archetypal colors. It would express in alchemy an enlivening, a great enlivening of the archetypes. But it also can express maybe something fanciful, kind of these rainbows that are pushing outward against the black. So it's just an incredible image when she's in the father energy. And so then what happens, if I can keep going? I hope that's okay to keep going. So she has this shift, a big shift is going to happen now. So she has a dream where she drew a young man to the window, and with a brush dipped in white oil, removed a black fleck from the cornea of his eye. A little golden lamp then became visible in the center of the pupil. The young man felt greatly relieved, and I told him that he should come again for treatment. Okay, so what Jung says about this is that this dream describes the change. The patient is no longer identical with her animus. The animus has, so to speak, become her patient since he has eye trouble. Okay, so now, interestingly, she had been in the father energy, but in this dream, she dreams of a young man that comes to the window, and she is removing this black fleck from the cornea of his eye, and a little golden lamp becomes visible in the center of the pupil. So this is a new kind of animus energy, isn't it? This is not the father animus energy. And so now she's working on this young animus energy in the dream. And synchronistically, at the same time, the patient was overcome by feelings of self-pity. It became clear to her how much she regretted never having had any children. She felt like a neglected animal or a lost child. Okay, so you see the shift that's happening. She even felt a little bit, I don't think Jung uses the word embarrassed by this painting here, but she felt like it was too much. There was something about it. And this energy was just a little bit kind of over the top. I mean, again, she doesn't use that language, but that's the sense, the felt sense about this. She knows something about this isn't quite right. And so then she again has this dream of the young animus figure. And then she starts to have the feelings about regretting having had children, felt like a neglected animal, a lost child. You can see her getting in touch with what I'm calling the beginning of her conscious femininity, or becoming more aware of the wholeness of her feminine life. So she's disidentifying with the father animus and having a felt sense of her feminine nature. Okay, now this is how she's going to paint that, like this. And if you know what's moving her into this, then you can kind of get a sense of what's here. So we go back to something that is plant-like. So we have this golden center, which seems to have these kind of arms or branches that are extended out from the golden center. And you can see it kind of extends up and branches into what look like kind of the form of leaves, right? And at the very top, it's kind of blossoming into a kind of a flower shape. And she does this in all four directions. This one is blossoming into kind of a yellow color. The gold here is becoming a plant and blossoming into what is a light blue. It's hard to see from this painting, a light blue. It kind of matches what's here. And then this one as well is going to blossom out into a kind of a light brown color to match the brown here. This is going to kind of branch out into and flower into a pink color. And I think that's the full circle. Interestingly, these leaves are going to form a kind of a canopy around these black spheres in the center, which have blue centers. So they're black spheres with the blue center. Now this has a very different feeling than those initial circles that she drew with all those circles. You remember the blue and all the circles. This looks much more concentrated. It looks more dense. And the blueness would associate, I would say, to the blue light from the unconscious, which is portrayed in fairy tales and in different myths, the illumination from the unconscious depths. And this is now a description of she's getting in touch with her own feminine, deep feminine nature with its own kind of illumination. And what's really interesting, if you think about the last picture where we saw the blackness, now there are golden rings that are extending, moving into the blackness. So there is a kind of, I don't want to say redemption, but maybe a transformation of this blackness. Something is happening to this blackness. And another interesting thing about this painting is that with these 4 colors, she is going to be introducing the pattern that she's going to use throughout for her 4 functions. The yellow will be associated in the rest of her paintings with her function of intuition, her intuitive function. The blue is going to be associated with the function of thinking throughout. The brown is going to be associated with the sensation function. And the pink is going to be associated with her feeling function. It's going to be very, very interesting. In many of her paintings later, she's going to keep this pattern. Now you see the winged rings that are on the periphery here. This is that differentiation of the animus now, where the animus is in a more supportive role. It's not this image, here where that father spirit is just dominating and pushing the whole sphere. Here, the animus energy, the winged energy, is on the kind of a supportive, carrying aspect for her, the personality. And the colors, it's so interesting that she associates the colors now, or the animus, with her functions. So keep that in mind. She's going to be looking at how, with each of her functions, does the animus live within each function. That's going to be a very interesting aspect to ponder. How does it live in her sensation function? How does the animus live in her intuitive function, her thinking, her feeling? That's going to be a part of her deep meditation as she goes through this. Anyway, I don't want to get carried away there. So this is the beginning of some conscious femininity. I'm saying that the consciousness I'm drawing from the golden center that develops into the plants and blossoms the way that it does into consciousness here, and the animus energy. All right. Now we get into the upper and the lower, the above and below, the transformation of her Christian myth. Okay, now backing up, if she's getting in touch with her feminine nature and just femininity in general, and she's relegating this animus energy to kind of the supportive role, then it's only follows that her Christian myth is going to go through a kind of a shift for her. It's going to go through a transformation. Because the Christian myth is predominantly a kind of has that masculine energy about it, Father, Son, and Spirit. Now she is going to, now that she's in touch with this feminine energy and pondering this more, it comes to her that her Christian myth isn't complete. Maybe it came to her before that, but that's the movement here between the pictures. which I've called upper and lower, above and below, the transformation of her Christian myth. Okay, and here's the mandala that she does. Absolutely incredible, incredible mandala where you can see the two halves. There's an upper half, really, with the rainbows, which we associated more with the father realm earlier. And then there's the lower half, which kind of has the brown border and has the serpents. But these serpents are green. So that corresponds to the very center of her mandala, or earlier mandala, the greenness. And so she's got the green serpents, 4 of them, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And she's got in the upper section with a black background, she has the 3 white birds. And so Jung associates that with the Christian Trinity. This is her Christian spirituality up above. It's white, but it's in the black background. Okay, now we drop to the bottom. We see there is the goat. And the goat is accompanied by the 2 black birds, which Jung would describe as the ravens of Wotan. This is the kind of that dark energy of Wotan, and of course the goat would correspond, one could say, from the Christian perspective, to the devil, to that aspect, or a devilish aspect, or maybe just nature, as we think about Pan and that energy of the instinctual life and of nature, the god of nature here. So we've got the goat, or Pan, or the devil, or whatever this energy is of the goat, along with the ravens. And Jung points out that it's got an orange background, which the symbolism of orange, of course, is the red and yellow mix. So the redness, the passionate red has the yellow of consciousness added to it to make orange. That would be one idea of orange color. But at any rate, there's an orange background here, a black background here. So this is the upper trinity, and if you will, a lower trinity of sorts. In the center, not to miss the center, she has the blue flower, this amazing blue flower with the center here is the lamp that she described that was in the eye, the pupil of the young man that she was working with. So this is the center lamp. This is the blue flower, which represents maybe her inner soul life surrounded by the red. So the red and the blue, these opposites, are just in a concentrated center, and the light, the illumination is coming from them. And then she has the 4 colors for her functions. You can see that. The yellow for intuition, the blue for her thinking function, the brown for her sensation, and the pink for her feeling. So it's interesting, the intuition and the thinking are pointing to the upper realm, right? And the feeling and the sensation are tied to the kind of the chthonic world and the world below. Now, there's another fascinating detail of this painting is that not only does she combine Christian myth and maybe the Greek myth or the Egyptian myth or the Norse myth here, she also brings in the Taoist myth. You would recognize these if you've worked with the I Ching. You would recognize these as hexagrams from the I Ching. So now she is using, in a sense, the I Ching to mediate between upper and lower. You can see the I Ching in both upper and lower realms. That is so fascinating. And in fact, for many people, the I Ching does serve as a kind of a connecting link from their traditional religious upbringing into branching into more the archetypal world. At any rate, these 4 hexagrams are significant. This particular hexagram here, and you can figure it out. Here's a broken line. This is a yin, a broken line, a broken line. Here is a yang line, a yin, and a yin. If you look this up in the I Ching, this is hexagram number 16, which in the Wilhelm translation is called enthusiasm. So there's enthusiasm, this energy of kind of the life of the gods in you. This hexagram, and I'll just kind of go briefly through these. This hexagram, if you, again, there's a yang, a yang, a yin, a yin, a yin, and a yang. If you look this up, it corresponds to hexagram number 41. Hexagram number 41 is called decrease or decreasing. And so she's got enthusiasm and she's got decreasing. So maybe kind of the opposites, or maybe a kind of a movement that's taking her downward, because she now, when we get to these two, this hexagram is number 46. Hexagram 46 in the I Ching is called pushing upward. And so it's the image of wood growing through the earth. And so it's the image of a plant that's pushing its way from below. And so you can see that this hexagram would be describing maybe even the energy of the snakes that kind of come from below and come through to the above. This fourth hexagram is hexagram number 50. Number 50 in the Wilhelm translation is called the cauldron. It's also called the ding. This is the ceremonial vessel in which the ritual foods were prepared at the great ceremonies. It also represents, this cauldron represents the beginning of a new dynasty. At the beginning of every Chinese dynasty, they would cast a new ding, a new vessel that represented the new kingdom or the new era. And so this not only is the container or a vessel for transformation, it also represents what kind of the establishing of a new dynasty. So she's got enthusiasm and decrease up above, and she's got pushing upward and the cauldron down below. I mean, it's fascinating how she's doing this. And so, I mean, you can do this in your own mandalas. You can add what comes to you in your dreams, but you can also add to you what comes to you in terms of what's meaningful at the moment. And maybe you've been throwing the I Ching and you can actually add images from the I Ching into the mandala. But this is where she is with the mandala now. And again, I'm gonna continue along. I hope I'm not rushing and people are following. I'm trusting that you are. All right, now there's going to be another significant change from this one into the next image. And you can try to guess what the next shift is going to be. But the next image is there's going to be an emphasis now on the lunar attitude, of the lunar energy. She's going to be including the waxing and the waning of the moon. And so this mandala is going to be governed by feminine the lunar cycle. And when she's in her lunar energy or lunar attitude, then the unconscious life is going to really literally come alive in such a way that there's going to be what Jung calls a doubling, where the image is split into two, which means it's coming now. It's a greater connection to it, and it's ready for consciousness. The doubling motif, Jung says, can also correspond to the readiness or the receptivity to synchronicities, where the inner experience is going to show up in the outer life in a certain way. So that's the doubling, the synchronicity. So an inner and an outer are going to happen. Okay, and then the differentiation, like I said, has to do with having a greater clarity about that particular image or symbol. So this is what she paints. She goes from this one now, instead of the hexagrams, right? These hexagrams, she's going to go to the lunar cycle. You can see the full moon, the quarter moon, the new moon, the quarter moon. So the lunar cycle is what kind of carries the energy for this mandala. And there's going to be a doubling that I mentioned. So up above, you're going to see not 3 birds, but 2 birds, right? Not 4 snakes, but 2 snakes. Not 1 goat, but 2 goats. And it's so interesting to look at these goats because now they have more human faces, right? Or yeah, I guess you could say human faces, humanized faces. They are carrying the black and the white, just as these birds are carrying the black and the white. So you can start to see when you're looking at this with the lunar attitude, then these things they start to work together, and there's a not a merging, but there's something about them that they take on the opposite qualities. So the opposites are starting to the energy of the opposites is here. She still has there's an upper and a lower. There's still the 2 snakes and the brown boundary. There's a white boundary up above. She's got the center blue flower. She's got the lamp in the center. Again, she has her 4 functions: the intuition above, the feeling, the thinking, and the sensation. And interestingly, in the above section, she has the lotus flower that's blossoming into all these 4 colors. It's growing from the center. So the lotus, again, coming from a kind of from an earthy phonic center, so to speak, or at least the muddy waters of where the flowers would grow. It's now sharing all these wonderful colors, the energy up above, and down below she's added the 2 crabs, which is her astrological sign. She was born on August 28th, and I don't know a thing about astrology, or very little, but this is the crab. Cancer is her astrological sign. So the water sign or watery sign. And then we have the 2 goats. So there is again an expression of either upcoming synchronicity, where the inner and the outer world are going to show up matched together, or there's going to be a greater differentiation of what the meaning is of each one of these images. So again, the pairing that we have here. Again, we could go longer, but I want to keep going. Okay, with that movement into the lunar energy, now then she has a balance. She's going to find a balance between night and day. You can see kind of a development going on here, the lunar and the solar. There's also going to be the movement of the stars within and the stars without. So this is what you can kind of feel the movement in her as she goes from painting to painting. So this is what this is going to look like. She's got now not just lunar energy, but she's got solar energy too. So you can imagine that she is, her relationship between conscious and unconscious, there may be a little more of a balance here. The sun is still turning in a counterclockwise direction, so that's still a tendency to the unconscious, I would say. The stars in the center would correspond to the stars. Sun and the moon were considered stars, if you will, in the ancient mind. So there are inner stars and outer stars. There's a correspondence between inner and outer, a kind of a synchronicity even that I was mentioning before, inner and outer. So again, we would say psychologically, her balance between the unconscious world and the conscious world is somehow they're meeting. Once again, you can see the colors of her functions. There's her brown sensation, her blue thinking, her yellow intuition, and her pink feeling. She continues that all the way through. The next one I call the Twilight Menagerie, or the animation of all the functions. So now she's going to concentrate in her inner meditation on the functions. That's so interesting. What this brought to mind was that she was these paintings now are not done while she was with Jung. This is when she's on her own back in New York, or on her way back to New York. And her analyst in New York was Beatrice Hinkle. And Beatrice Hinkle one of her big primary interest was the typology. So this may be where Kristine Mann is picking up some of that emphasis on the functions. Not that Jung doesn't emphasize functions, but Kristine Mann is really emphasizing the functions here. So here I call it a twilight menagerie, because the night and day, it's kind of that twilight time. And look what she's done. Look what she's done with the images here. You can get an orientation by remembering that these are her functions. So with her her feeling function, she adds in a sheep and a goat and some pigs, or some boars in her feeling realm. In her thinking function, she's adding lions. These are lions. And she's adding kind of looks like an eyeball, but it's really also the sun. So this is pointing to her day world, her conscious side, but thinking, her feeling more on the unconscious side. Look at her intuition. She puts the sphere where the moon is. So this would probably confirm that her inferior function is intuition, because she's picking up moon energy through her intuition. Quite interesting. And you can look how her ego energy is supporting that up above. And then down below, you can see her sensation function, which is the whole world, right? And then she has her snakes and her turtles and her fish. All this is her sensation. So it's fascinating to me that she is populating her functions with the appropriate, not appropriate, but the animal energy even that fits. The lion energy of her thinking, and the sheep and the goat and the boars of her feeling, the lunar aspect of her intuition, and the earthy aspect of her sensation. It's so fascinating. You're going to have to go back to look at this in the book, because I'm not doing it all justice. Now we're going to get to when she gets back to New York. And so it's going to be a full circle. And this is where I say that she's psychically fully alive. So this is when she's back in New York City from her trip. The city life, you can see the city is all aglow. The lights in the city. You can even pick out little mandalas that are in the city. She draws the church here, mandala, and she's got these little kind of mandala shapes. The clock is sitting at 10 past midnight. So we're into the witching hour, the midnight hour, right? There's the moon in the sky. There's still traffic in New York at past midnight, of course. And then look at her inner mandala. In her inner mandala, it's so psychically alive. Her inner life is so animated. This is the opposite of stuckness, I would say, where she is bringing so much energy with her intuitive function and her thinking function are up on top. And you can see the figures are kind of tending this fire. Maybe I should enlarge it a bit. You can see in her thinking function, you also have birds. You have birds in the intuition, which is expression of intuitive life, right? But in the thinking too, she's got her thoughts, and she's got, maybe this is a lectern for lecturing, or I don't know what this is. But the masculine and the feminine are tending the fire. And there's even the smaller figures that are supporting them. So, I mean, you could really ponder over the meaning of what's enlivened in her now. You have the moons that are kind of the guardians or the governing energy of all of this, but there's a redness and energy that's part of her mandala that is here. Here's her sensation, the brown. Here is her pinkness of her feeling, the palm tree and the horse. And so she's made her full return, and she's back in New York with some energy and life. Now this is, I'm going to kind of briefly touch on the next ones. This next mandala, again, she's back in New York and she's concentrating on the four functions, but look what she does. She looks at the animus energy that corresponds to each function. I think this is really, really interesting. So with her her intuition, there's a kind of animus energy that's associated with her intuitive function. And with her, with these birds, for example, with her thinking function, she has the elephant energy, which, I mean, you think about Ganesha and the remover of obstacles, right? You know, so her thinking has this kind of animus energy or associated to it. Here is her sensation. Her sensation is now green and is associated with the snakes, almost like Asclepius, the healer. And so her sensation is really grounded in, you can see the greenness, it's no longer brown. So there's a greenness that is her sensation. So it feels more alive than brown sensation. You know, and in her feeling, there is the horse. So you can imagine her drive and what moves her. You know, the animus would be empowering that feeling in her. So it's fascinating to me that she would take her functions and associate the animus energies connected to them. Finally, we have what I call the eros gamos, or a mystical marriage. And this mandala, this is the one I used for the very beginning. I call it a marriage because if you count, we don't have the 8-fold mandala, we have a 6-fold mandala. And 6 is a marriage number. 6 is the marriage of the 3 and the 3 coming together. And so with this, you have I would say there's a coming together of maybe the masculine and the feminine. Maybe there is just a kind of an inner harmony that she is beginning to experience at this stage. This is now in 1933. So this would be some 5 years after her beginning with Jung. So she's having an inner harmony. Now, if you look at the paintings that are in the chapter, this doesn't stay harmonious, it changes. But at this moment in time, she paints it in a very harmonious way with the connection, the darker interior connecting the red centers. And it's just, there's something sublime about this image. And then finally, the last painting we'll look at is called The Flower of Eternal Life, the unfolding of the self. And she did this 10 years after she started her work with Jung. And this is the night blooming Sirius. It's a beautiful mandala with the leaf base, the golden black serpents, the star above. And in 1938, she was still 7 years. No, wait, 38 to 45. Yeah, 7 years from her death. But she paints this night blooming Sirius. The Sirius is not, this isn't a lotus flower. The Sirius, if you know it, is a kind of a cactus, and it blooms only at nighttime, which is fascinating, right? And some species of the Sirius bloom only once a year at nighttime. So you really have to be careful to catch it when it blooms. So I love this blossoming. That is the night blossoming. And then there's the star above, which expresses something of her star nature as well, that archetypal star. I mean, when we consider when we die, our soul and spirit become a star in the sky. This is almost a anticipation. I mean, she doesn't know she's going to get cancer. And then she gives a talk in 38 called The Shadow of Death. And we're going to end with this quotation from her lecture that she gave in 1938. And this really summarizes this whole process we've been looking at in a nutshell. So she says, "It is as if there had been implanted in each of us at birth a seed, smaller than the small and greater than the great, which is nurtured largely in unconsciousness during the passionate strivings of early and middle life, but that as the conflicts of the ego period abate and the shadows approach, there could take place within the psyche a complete unfolding of that four-petaled flower of eternal life, which Jung has called the self. So that is the summary really of her whole process. And I'm going to